requires wisdom. And Dave Blanchard has had one heck of a career, and his wisdom around money and finance is unique, it's stimulating, and it's profound. Enjoy my interview with him. Dave, pleasure to meet you, and thanks so much for spending some time with us here today.
My pleasure, thank you.
So when you hear the theme of money, and there's all the social stigma around money, etc., what comes to mind for you?
First thing, when you chase it, it runs. When you serve, it flows. That's the first thing.
Okay, and so when you say when you serve, it flows, what do you mean by that?
When you focus on serving people, stepping into their world, finding out what they really want, filling that need, you're paid handsomely for the process.
So the money starts to flow toward you as compared to running away from you.
Opposed to chasing the money and having it run away from you. I often say you can probably run faster, tackle it, break its arm, but it's not a very pleasant experience.
For either of you.
For either, yes.
That's great. You wrote a book called Equanimity. What's the theme of that book?
Equanimity means peace of mind, but it's a very special kind of peace of mind. It's a peace of mind you get when you know how to create a dream, you're in the action, you're actually doing the work of creating the dream, and you have an accomplishment, you have this wonderful sense that comes upon you. That's equanimity. The antithesis of equanimity is trepidation and fear. So if you can just feel the other end of that spectrum being equanimity. So equanimity, conquering Mount Entrepreneur, the peace that comes from taking the action necessary, living in the millimeters, doing the work, having a clear vision, serving the people, having a dream that you intrinsically validate, embracing the structure, facing the challenges, diving into them, learning from them, moving past them, knowing that they're all there to prepare you for the next step. That's equanimity.
Is there a process or are there milestones along the road to get there?
Yes.
What are they?
In the book, I have the reader as the main character. They actually pull into the parking lot of Mount Entrepreneur. And the first thing they notice is there are a lot of people in the parking lot. And one car is up on blocks. There are no rims. And there are roots growing through the axle. There's another one where someone is delivering a pizza and there are many boxes in the car. There's another one, the car is being repossessed and the family's in the car being driven away. So metaphorical for how life is. Right. And you see people pounding on their steering wheel. And then the instructions are, when you get to the parking lot, read the first 3 critical decisions before starting the journey. Critical decision first is become the boss. Engage in life, embrace principles, connect, serve, create value, contribute, make that decision. 2, hire yourself. What is that? All the habits of thinking we bring with us. We carry them everywhere we go. They impact every facet of our life. Our emotional state, the decisions we make, the actions we take, the results we create. Are they supporting or sabotaging us? We're going to bring them with us, so let's hire them. Then the third decision is let's improve ourselves. Let's start embracing our gifting and let's start jettisoning those unhealthy habits of thinking. With those decisions made, we're ready to take a hike up the mountain, if you will. And in the book, we're met by a mentor who walks us to the first mile marker. It's I to the power of I. It's an intrinsic concept valued intrinsically. It's the formal science of axiological mathematics, which defines valuing a human being has the highest mathematical value of anything on this planet. So we learn to step into a person's world. We learn to listen and love and serve. And as we are unleashing the energy and productive cooperation in them, we get to move to the next mile marker, which is intrinsically valuing our dreams. You and I both know if we're going to generate revenue, we don't do that ourselves. Right. You cannot create your dream in a vacuum. It requires the participation with people. And so you step into their world, not to manipulate, because you can't fake love. Mm-hmm. And you create understanding, walls come down, cooperation floods out. Dr. Hartman measured that as 40% of their cooperation energy comes out. And then we're ready to go to mile marker number 2.
Which is?
An extrinsic concept valued intrinsically. It's the second highest mathematical value. We say, you want to know what your why is? It's the most valuable thing, second only to valuing people and valuing yourself. How do we intrinsically value a dream? We go into a place called the Valley of Dreams, where the mentor helps you identify a dream that can be intrinsically valued, which simply means when I found this thing I intrinsically value, that I want to create, number one, it's going to create spontaneous, inspired ideas. That when I get them, if I have a person wired to a functional MRI, we would see part of their brain ignite. So we know that it ignites something. We call that passion. We work without counting the cost or tracking the time. We'll do whatever it takes to create a tangible reality, that which we've seen so clearly in our mind. That's the first test. Is our dream not just creating the idea, but the action to create it?
Right. 2,
this is a second of the third test. Second test, it encourages us. I love that word. En, add to, courage. If you speak French, cour, I don't say that very well, but cour means heart or blood. It adds to our courage to stretch and grow and become a better person. And as we become a better person, we actually become better at intrinsically valuing people and in actually creating and taking action. And third, it fosters abundance. Fosters abundance. Not only are we doing it to invite other people to participate in what's been created, we actually share with them how to create. So we're inspiring them to follow the same pattern. Once we understand that our dream meets those 3 tests, we're ready for mile marker 3, which is we're going to intrinsically value the structure needed to create the dream. We have done 75,000 habit finder assessments. We measure people's habits of thinking. We use the formal science of axiological mathematics. Nobody needs to remember that, other than it's deadly accurate. We know how a person thinks. And we know that entrepreneurial souls, us independent thinkers, 97% of us resist structure, unless it serves us. But our instinctual reaction is to resist the structure. And quite often the world wants to impose the structure, and we want to be able to have structure support the dream, the creation of the dream. But we'll want to be intrinsically valuing people and have a dream that we're intrinsically valuing. Now the structure makes sense. It'll support us. There's a scene in the book. We're with our mentor. We're staring at a 1,000-foot cliff. And the mentor is explaining where to put the pitons and where the footholds and the handholds. And, you know, most entrepreneurs want to take their own path, right? Well, this is a straight, S-T-R-A-I-T, straight and narrow path that leads to the top. It could be a circuitous route, but it's a straight. It goes around all of the challenges, the simplest, safest way to the top. He's explaining this to us. Then he turns to us and he says this: you do have a dream big enough to sustain what's about to happen. And we say yes, and he asked us and we share our dream. It happened to be this person wanted to build a business and build a cabin, right? And he looks up at that mountain and looks back and goes, it had better be a really cool cabin. That's where we depart most of the time in the process. We get to the actual climb, the tough part, and we want to do it an easy way or a less stressful way. But dream creation requires embracing structure and intrinsically valuing it, which means we willingly embrace the structure. Entrepreneurs will not do that unless they have learned to intrinsically value people and have a dream that they intrinsically value. That's sufficient motivation to embrace the structure that will support the creation.
You seem to look through this lens of identifying intrinsic and extrinsic factors.
Yes.
And that seems to be a premise from which to build the rest of the constructs that you're working around. So can you give examples of what you consider to be intrinsic versus extrinsic and how they might apply?
Certainly. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for identifying that. In the assessment, the secret to finding out how a person thinks, their habits of thinking, was to measure their intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic thoughts, because we think in all three dimensions. Intrinsic are the thoughts we have about things beyond value, a human being. And we can value a human being based on their uniqueness, their appearance, their belief system, a belief system that's harmful, performance that's inappropriate, and pain they might be struggling with. So when we look at a human being, we are considering all of those areas. And with the assessment, we're able to measure our habits of thinking in all 6 of those areas. Extrinsic things are tangible things, measurable, comparable, contrastable things, things that we want to create. The beautiful thing about an extrinsic item that we value intrinsically, it's an external thing. It's like this beautiful home of yours that we're in today while we're doing this interview. This is an extrinsic concept. It probably inspires you. It's inspiring me. It'll cause you to want to stretch and grow. It'll cause you to want to serve people at a higher level, be a better person. Well, but it's an extrinsic concept. But isn't it powerful that an extrinsic concept, an external, physical, tangible concept, could inspire us to do internal work?
Right.
That's a secret. It's a slippery slope. Then we have systemic thought. Things that exist only in our minds. Order, structure, rules, regulations, policies, procedures. When we understand how we think, the habits of thinking, then we can find out where are the challenges. For an example, entrepreneurs have a tendency to be very visual. There are 7 ways you can use that visual thinking. 2 of them are deadly. We can engage in fantasy. Go into the future to a time when something's created, and then we start to imagine what it'll be like after we've created the dream. That's really a key factor, because the entrepreneur has this ability to vividly visualize to such an extent that when we do that, we create what's called a mental construct. It's a new reality. To the mind, it's so real that when life shows up differently, and it always does, the body goes into an autonomic response. Interesting word. It needs more than automatic.
Right.
Cortisol surge from the sympathetic nervous system. Anybody ever feel one of those? Our amygdala, our fight or flight center, starts sending up fear dendrites. You know this as a doctor. And it starts to shut down the energy-rich parts of our brain, our empathy, practical judgment, common sense, that prefrontal cortex, that higher level of consciousness, and we're rendered emotionally paralyzed.
Yeah.
And quite often the solution is to go back into fantasy. We see this undulation of high emotional highs and low emotional lows in entrepreneurial souls. They haven't learned yet how to manage that gift of vivid visualization. So they're either in fantasy or they're in catastrophe, playing out those worst case scenarios. So devastating to the body. The research is so clear on cortisol. When we become a veritable cortisol factory, we know that at age 65, 90% of or 95% of the pathology we'll be experiencing will be a direct result of the release of that stress hormone in our body. We want to learn how to manage this as an entrepreneur. So there are 5 ways we can. I won't go through all of those, but it starts with a fulcrum that says, what's my secret desire? What's my real intention? Do I want life to be easier and less stressful? Is that where my secret desires go? Because if they do, I'm going to tip my vivid visualization toward fantasy and catastrophe. It's the natural negative tendency, the proclivity. However, if this fulcrum is, I want to engage in life, I want to embrace principles, and I want to embrace struggles and obstacles. I want to learn from them. I want to connect and serve people. I want to create value. I want to leave everyone and everything better than I found it. And I want to contribute to the world. When that's my secret desire, then that gift of visualization tips over to seeking inspiration and getting inspired ideas, mentally rehearsing, getting inspired ideas, exploring, problem solving, planning, goal setting. and I get those ideas, and I mentioned it lights up part of our brain that's normally dormant in a human being. That's what it's built for. That's why the gift is given to us of vivid visualization, to ignite that part of our brain and feel that passion, which is the gift we're given to sustain the work of creation. Nobody gets to skip the work. It's either boring, mundane, repetitive, burdensome, and hard, or it's passion-driven. We want to be passion-driven, fulcrum, tip the vivid visualization to constructive uses, get the inspired ideas, ignite the passion, and drive the action. That's a systemic thought. Yep. If we go into fantasy and catastrophe, we go to the extrinsic thoughts, we don't have passion. So everything is hard and boring and mundane. We hate our life. I call it the ugh factor. Everybody watching this just go, ugh. That's every time life shows up differently than we imagined. We hold life hostage, tangible, extrinsic reality, hostage to our expectations. What would happen if we embraced life, the clay we've been given, and we create the most we can with it? We go to our mind intentionally to get an inspired idea about how we could do this more effectively. Because if we're in fantasy catastrophe, we're going to hate our life, expectations unmet, unhappy. The number one cause, after 75,000 assessments, the number one cause of self-esteem challenges, unmet expectations.
Wow. So is it a journey versus destination type of a theme where if you're living just on the destination and not wanting to do the journey, you end up in this sort of catastrophic state?
The secret is to find joy in the journey.
Yeah.
When I work with successful entrepreneurs, one thing we know about them, they love the creation, and when they get to the destination where most people would say, oh good, now I get to travel the beaches of the world, right. What do? They go do it again and again. They can't help it. They love the freedom of creating. They're not looking for ease and less stress. The whole process of creation, they find joy from the process.
Yeah, it's I'm guilty as charged. When I sold my company some years ago, I think I recovered for about 6 months. And now I'm working harder now than I did back then. It's a compulsion. But I do love the journey, and that took a lot of process and development to get to that point, to actually just love every day of it and have gratitude attached to it. So those are very key and I think unique distinctions you're making between intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic values. And I can already tell you that me having that as a structure to be able to rely on in processing my thinking, I already feel the change that can create in me. So thank you for sharing that here.
You're so welcome.
What inspired you in your own life to get into this work that you're doing?
Started out as a financial advisor, and I figured out who needed the most of what I had to offer, which were doctors. I was developing real estate privately from the money I was making. The doctors were saying, gosh, could we get into your next apartment building? So we started building apartment buildings, primarily 100-unit apartment complexes in San Diego. Then 1986 happened, the Tax Reform Act. As the teeth of that act took a bigger and bigger bite out of accelerated depreciation and other benefits of real estate ownership, 1989, we're building our last $5.5 million apartment complex for a client. The world is falling apart, and then it fell apart. And I was so optimistic. This is a bump in the road. We'll find a solution to this, right? So I went through millions of dollars that had taken years to accumulate of my own, and then through the corporate lines of credit, and guess who the guarantor was? Me, $1 million. I would spend the next 10 years paying back $1 million. And that was the film industry time. And there was one specific moment, dark night. I produced a film on child abuse that was on every military base in the world, every Department of Defense school system in the world, and 30,000 school districts, United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, very wonderful piece on child abuse prevention, emotional, physical, sexual child abuse. And the Waters bill passed, was, rescinded in California, and the sales dried up overnight. And it was keeping me alive while I was writing feature film scripts, learning the craft of being a writer and director. And the world just fell apart. And it got really dark. I don't mind telling you, as dark can be. Dark as dark can be. And the night that the decision was made to maybe cash in on that $1 million life insurance policy, it was the love of my wife, Ramona. We've been married 42 years. We have 7 children, 27 grandchildren now. I look back at that moment in time. My love for her got me through the night. And the next morning, I remember crying out, I long to cry to the God of my youth, but the God of my youth will not hear my cry. I must change my God or change my cry. And then I got down on my knees and said, oh, I just want to talk to the real one. Could the real one show up? And had a really precious moment. And it really sounded like this. If you'll show me how to dig out of this, I will spend the rest of my life teaching other people how to do likewise. And over the next 7 years, I was shown. And we paid off the debt, accumulated the revenue, wrote my last feature film script, which was for one of Mandino's books, The Christ Commission. And in 2000, I'm in New York. Y2K didn't happen. We're in Manhattan shooting testimonials for a project we were doing for a commercial show on CNBC. Betty Mandino calls me and says, Dave, the rights to the greatest salesman are not being renewed. Would you be interested? 17 years later, just a quick comment, the movie's in pre-production for The Greatest Salesman. So excited about that. But that's what we started with. Then we decided, let's build a training program. Let's find measurement. Let's bring in an assessment. Let's start helping people change their lives. And let's use the principles that were learned during those 7 years to change lives. That's really what drove what we're doing. That's what keeps me going, is seeing someone who's in fantasy learn how to use their mind constructively, fall in love with life, embrace their gifting, and go create something magnificent. Of course, we've been able to create some magnificent things in that process as well.
It's an incredible story. How wide is the chasm between fantasy and the road that you want to put them on?
My greatest challenge, so many well-intentioned teachers share with people how to set up a dream board and how to vividly visualize. And I happen to believe in dream boards and vivid visualization. But because of that fulcrum being, I want life to be easier and less stressful, their natural negative tendency is to engage in fantasy. I still remember an adult man, first time we talked on the phone, he said, Dave, I can almost touch it. I can almost taste it. Why can't I have it? What's wrong with me? And then he said this, does God not love me? And I went back to that moment when I cried out, change my God or change my cry. I had to change my cry. I wanted this white horse to come in, at night and save me and put money on my front porch and just vividly visualize and have it magically happen. It didn't happen because it doesn't happen that way. My greatest concern is that we want to make sure that we're taking people who have the gift to vividly visualize, which is 97% of those who are pursuing this dream, and show them how to use this enormous gift in a way that they can get an inspired idea that ignites passion. That's the purpose for the vivid visualization. Ignites passion, the passion supports the work, and doors open, magical things happen, miracles occur, but not by just vividly visualizing them into existence. Creates the idea. We act on the idea. The universe lines up, and we're able to create magnificent things. I want so badly for people to know how to do this, because I've seen way too many lives destroyed. People left broke broken and angry, pursuing this belief that you can vividly visualize tangible reality into existence. Oh, can you use vivid visualization to bring the powers of the universe together? And if we're in the process of serving and blessing people, we've got a dream that we intrinsically value. It's a thing, but it's giving us inspired ideas. It's helping us become a better person. We want to share the fruits of it with other people, and we're embracing structure, and we're enjoying the journey. Oh, then we can get back to happiness. We can find excitement. We want to take on the challenges. We get to experience equanimity. Yeah. Og said, I hunger for success. I thirst for happiness and peace of mind. Lest I act, I will perish in a life of failure, misery, and sleepless nights. I will command, and I will obey my own command. I will act now. That peace of mind that we hunger for is equanimity. And it doesn't come from fantasy. It comes from a clear vision and a focus on the millimeters and taking on the challenges and actually creating something, going, wow, look, I have something I didn't have yesterday. And we feel this sense of accomplishment. And we have equanimity. I think it's the thing we ultimately all want. Equanimity. It comes from that process. It doesn't come from fantasy.
No, and it's such a critical distinction, and I think, I live in an entrepreneurial world. All my friends are entrepreneurs, and I have seen, the pain that you're describing. I've experienced it personally, and it's a cognitive dissonance, between, what this vision might be and, where I am right now. One of the premises that I hold is that contradictions lead to destruction. The amount of destruction is relative to the level of the contradiction, which comes from Rand. And one thing I posted once that got a lot of response is that if you want to know if you have contradictions in your life, if the sentiment you're experiencing is where I am is not who I am. Now you start to look, and because that is that loss of equanimity. That is saying, there's some distance between how I perceive myself and what I'm actually seeing around me or experiencing around me in life. But I think you've so passionately and so beautifully articulated it. And it's not just the fact that you're able to name it, but also you understand the solution to it or the remedy to it. Because it is, in my mind, somewhat of an outrage in the self-help world where people become personal development junkies. And they're up and they're down because their emotions are up and down based on this vision, and it crashes, and another vision, and it crashes. But there's more to the story than just that, and you've really told that story, as well as I've ever heard it, in very clear terms. So maybe with equanimity, in that third stage of, where you're looking up and saying, geez, what's the path? And well, that better be one heck of a cabin. Where does it take us from there? How does the story proceed from there?
May I just emphasize one point?
Please.
The greatest challenge in self-esteem is born out of one of our greatest gifts, misused. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
When we learn to use that gift constructively and we fall in love with the journey, we are healthy and whole. And when we're healthy and whole, we're more available to serve. And you can see how that cycle just continues. We serve, we put bread out on the water, it always comes back. It's a law. But if we're not available because we're in fantasy, we're in catastrophe, we're beating ourselves up, we're so consumed by what we're not getting and what's not happening and the frustrations around that, and all of this opportunities walking by us, we're missing it.
Yeah.
So our mission is really to help someone become whole, so that they can become available, so that they can embrace their gifting. Because one of the great things we discovered through the assessment work was that the entrepreneur also has very clear empathy and intuition 88% of the time. Very clear practical judgment and common sense 85% of the time. It's like a giant vein of gold they're not accessing. because they're using their mind destructively, hating their life, beating themselves up in such deprecating dialogue, questioning worth and worthiness and ability, beliefs and contribution. What's wrong with me? Does God not love me? And all this opportunity is walking by. That's the rest of the story.
Yeah.
It's actually using our gift constructively, healing our self-esteem, showing up in the service of another person, and falling in love with creation. I believe that we're here on this earth. I call this a laboratory for creation. The greatest joy comes when we're in creation. It's like we're supposed to do something about that. We're not here to travel the beaches of the world and have a life of ease and less stress. I love what you said. You did that for 6 months. The word that came to my mind is, after a while, it gets kind of boring. It's okay, now what? And you get back into creation, the next time even more pure, the next time even more pure, the next time even more pure, finding more and more joy, and attracting people to the process, teaching them how to do so, being an example unto them. Can you think of a greater way to live?
I can't, and I think the whole concept of creation is something that has many facets, and that is the uniquely human thing, to be able to think of something and then have it become a material reality. And it's the foundation for the mystery of life. The whole concept of creation, where do we come from? Creation is something to have a lot of gratitude for, obviously, because we have this life. But then we also get to become creators in our own rights. And how do you relate the theme of creation to the theme of wealth, abundance, money? I mean, how do those two things fit together in your model?
Very simply.
Yeah.
When you're focused on creation, igniting passion, doing that which is passion-driven, the natural consequence is abundance.
Yeah.
It's not the focus.
Right.
You don't do it to become wealthy. You become wealthy because you're doing it. So you're in creation, and in creation, you're finding joy, blessing the lives of other people. And I happen to believe in a higher power. And when our purpose is blessing people's lives, I happen to think we're in that being's playground. We're partners. And to be a partner with, to know and be known, to trust and be trusted, I think this is the greatest source of self-esteem. We are kind of alone in this world. We can be in a great relationship. I'm in a great relationship with a wonderful sweetheart. Even then, sometimes it can feel alone. But to be connected with that source, knowing that your waking hours are spent on who can I serve next, put them on my path and I will serve them. Getting an inspired idea, acting on it, creating something you wouldn't have had if you're in fantasy or catastrophe. Living in that space, in that partnership.
It doesn't happen automatically, though, does it? What is the discipline to stay in that space, to stay in that frame of reference?
This is what I share with clients. The natural tendency is to go into fantasy. I mean, who wouldn't want life a little easier for a period of time? It gets boring after a while, but who wouldn't? And then catastrophe. I was raised in a family, loved my dad, lost mom and dad last year.
Sorry.
And I have Dad's permission to share this. He would paraphrase Mark Twain and say, don't tell me worrying doesn't work because everything I worry about never happens, right?
That's great.
So we can go into catastrophe. I say to a client, okay, let me share with you the 5 constructive ways of thinking. Let's make sure our fulcrum is correct. We're not into ease and less stress. We're into engage, embrace, connect, serve, create value. Let's get an inspired idea. And let's act on it. Let's prove the veracity of the inspiration. Create something you wouldn't have had otherwise. And have a moment with that. Do that 5 times. 5 times. And you'll start to gain an appreciation, even a hunger for staying in that space. If we wander over here, and I sometimes do life this way, we're driving on a road, and over here is this dark dungeon of despair and discouragement is like a vacuum that just wants to suck us into this hole, right? Fantasy's up there. So we're driving on this road, and all of a sudden it starts tipping like this, you know? And then all of a sudden we hit an ice spot, and whoosh, boom, down in catastrophe we go. And we know this. We spend 10 minutes in catastrophe. The release of cortisol and fear dendrites in the body, it takes time for it to bleed off. 10 minutes, 10 hours. Mm-hmm. It's not total impairment for 10. It's like having 5 whiskey sours and saying, be sober. Well, it takes a while for the alcohol to bleed off the body. Likewise with the cortisol and the fear dendrites, right? So we want to catch this as quickly as possible. This may sound silly, but we actually do this. I've done this with 3,000 people in an audience. Okay, I'll turn my back to them and I'll say, everybody lift your left hand. This is your tomahawk. There's the dark dungeon of despair and discouragement. There's fantasy. You're tempted to drift over there, pull out your tomahawk. Not going there today. I'm staying in creation. Repeat, not going there today. I'm staying in creation. I went to speak to a group. Ramona was with me. It was so fun. And I stood up and they said, okay, go. And everybody pulled a tomahawk out behind there. They had read the book. They came with their tomahawks. I had a client tell me that she had done that 75 times in one day. So we packaged a giant foam tomahawk and sent it to her. Embrace the tomahawk. Not going there today. I'm staying in creation. I'm going to use one of those 5 constructive ways of thinking, because if I choose to do this and I get an inspired idea, I act on it, again, create something I would not have had otherwise, and then have a moment of appreciation. Wow, if I'd have been in catastrophe, this wouldn't be here. If I'd have been in fantasy, this wouldn't be here. You do that 5 times, you'll develop an appetite for this. This is a lot more joyful, more meaningful, more substantive. It's real. I call it real money you can put in a real bank account with which you can buy a real couch.
So many of us have these subconscious thoughts or patterns that are a byproduct of our mothers, fathers, teachers, preachers. And like, don't bite off more than you can chew, don't try to be something you're not, rich people are thieves, you know, all those kinds of things exist, which could be kind of in a subcurrent that's affecting our ability to try to break out in the way that you're talking about and create equanimity, where we want these things, but maybe we feel like we're not supposed to have them because it wouldn't be a moral act. How do you see that? And, you know, because you talk about self-esteem, self-image, you know, it's kind of filtered into what you've said. So how do you address that in your approach towards helping people?
May I share one of the most interesting discoveries?
Yes.
Entrepreneurs have high levels of empathy and intuition. Many of them could be natural servants. However, 97% of them are also vivid visionaries with a high risk of going into fantasy. And depending on who their mentor is, they're at even a greater risk of going into fantasy, trying to vividly visualize tangible reality into existence by itself without action. So here we are. In the extrinsic world, creating our dream, our secret desire and real intention is ease and less stress, which is incongruent with the math,
right,
which is the principle, which represents the principle of creation. First measurement's in balance. We are intrinsically valuing people and loving them. The second measurement is out of balance. You're a chiropractor. Subluxation, could we say?
Yes, you can.
You understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
Okay.
So here we've got the first measurement in place. We've got the second measurement out of balance, and the third measurement embracing structures out of balance. We're resisting it. We become duplicitous. We want to serve people, but secretly, privately, we want to buy a tropical island somewhere where we can get away from all those annoying people. That's duplicity.
Yeah.
In other words, we would like to serve them, but we have a challenge with the money piece, because at a very subconscious level, we want to do something other than serve. We just want to be on the beaches of the world in that tropical island. That duplicity creates conflict. We serve, but we feel uncomfortable charging for it. If we have a dream we're intrinsically valuing, we're getting inspired ideas, it's now in alignment. We are getting inspired ideas that ignite passion. We're taking action. We are being encouraged to stretch and grow and become a better person, even better at connecting with the people. And we are intrinsically valuing the structure. We actually want to embrace it to create the dream. We're now in total alignment. So the very first thing we want to do is get somebody into alignment. Now, once we're in alignment, we see the habits of thinking, which we measure so beautifully with the assessment. We don't know what someone's thinking, we just know how they're thinking, and we know the common risks associated. We're not therapists, we're coaches.
Right.
So we're not going to process childhood traumas, but we teach a principle. And I'll share it with you if I may.
Please.
I was in Chicago, and I'm going to speak the next day to 700 people. And I know these people have a challenge, self-esteem. I'd assessed 100 of them. So I go to sleep that night pondering, what could I say? Now, most people think, weren't you prepared when you came? And it's interesting how often, I know you know this place. You stand in front of an audience and you came with one idea and you look in a heart and all of a sudden you're saying something different, spontaneous. It's exactly what they need. You get done, you can't remember what you said. You've been in that space?
Many times.
I trust that. I really trust that. Went to sleep and I had a dream. In the dream, I was dragging this big muslin sack around. Weighed about 200 pounds and it was so big it's dragging on the ground. And a man's approaching me and I wanted to connect with him. And I knew all the principles for intrinsic validation, but I was exhausted. And this really tender voice said, David, let go of the sack. Then it said, turn around and face the sack. There's a reason why we drag our mistakes and our frustrations behind us, right? Well, I reluctantly turned and faced it. Then the voice said, empty the sack. I emptied it. It was a pile of silver orbs with spikes on them. And the voice said, pick up the most painful. I was in Chicago to speak. That most painful orb happened in Chicago. My father was going to college, working at night. My mother was working in a high-rise. She grew up on a farm. They didn't have plumbing in her house till after she was married. Big difference between that farm and Chicago. There was a couple who couldn't have children who befriended my parents and said they'd love to take care of me and my sibling. My parents thought it was a godsend. They bought us clothes. Santa Claus came to our studio apartment at Christmas time. It was wonderful. Problem? I'm holding this orb in my hands. They were pedophiles. I'm holding this, and this really tender voice says, Dave, anybody else suffering from a similar wound? I said, yes. I know I'd had that conscious thought before, but it was different in that moment. And it said, take this experience and engrave it on your heart. I remember being conscious, spikes, but it slid right in. Now, I had a big stack, so there were many. I won't go through all of them, but one after another, I felt like a new person. And then I heard these words, and I'd like to say this to anybody who's watching this, if I may just speak right directly to you. Your character was forged in the furnace of adversity. You know what pain feels like. Can we take it back? No. But we can choose to use this as a rich resource to better understand what someone else is experiencing. And if we use it that way, there's finally purpose in the suffering, joy in the journey, and much needed healing in our soul. I turned around and faced that man, and guess what he was dragging? A sack. I didn't see it before. Not only did he have a sack, I somehow knew what was in it. What was in it? I knew the questions to ask. Connection was starting to occur, and I woke up. I have studied that dream over and over and over in my mind. our greatest gift. All of that crap that's happened in our life, our failures, our mistakes, our frustrations, those people that have hurt us, those people we have hurt. It has uniquely prepared us to serve. Because if we'll take it out of the sack and stop being the victim, put it in our heart and use it to listen, we will hear things nobody else hears. We'll see things nobody else sees. We'll ask questions nobody else would dare ask. And it creates connection. Finally, somebody understands me. The greatest gift we can give a human being. Walls come down, energy, productive cooperation flood out. It fills the void in our soul. So I look at all those things that have happened to us. We could spend hours processing, trying to find out the answer why. The booby prize. Okay, now what? So the now what is? Do you want to drag it around? Or are you ready to put it in your heart and use it in the service of another person to become more effective at intrinsically valuing people intrinsically, the first mile marker? Because if you are, I'm a coach, I can guide you. If you're not, you need a therapist to help you process it. Are you ready to move forward? That's the question. If you're ready to move forward, then we go to work.
Well, that was literally breathtaking, and I appreciate you sharing that. There's nothing I want to say to even get people moved away from what they're experiencing right now from you. So I'm just going to simply say with enormous gratitude, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being a part of this project, which we're hoping serves many people around the world.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.